Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the new album from The Orb, Abolition of the Royal Familia. Alright, The Orb. I've been covering Alex Patterson and company for years now. Still gotta do a proper discography review for them at some point. Maybe sooner rather than later, who knows. I've covered all their albums that came out since I started this channel, so Moon Building 2703 AD in 2015, COW/Chill World in 2016, and No Sounds Are Out of Bounds in 2018, as well as a one-off remix EP I think Patterson asked me personally to cover via Twitter DM, or whoever manages their Twitter. Also their third album, Orbis Terrarum from 1995, I covered that one too as my first ever Patreon request. Oh yeah, and I even saw them live shortly after their last album dropped and did a mini vlog about it. Of course, there was no way I was missing a new project from these guys. While I'll admit I don't love every single one of their albums, they've had so many projects over the years that I've been really into. Adventures Beyond the Ultraworld, UF Orbis Terrarum, The Dream, Sidonia, to name just a few. They're almost certainly in my top 10 favorite bands ever. Their heavily textured mixes of ambient and dance music came together in such a unique and easily recognizable way, even despite the dozens of names that have involved themselves with the project to whatever extent over the years. Either long-running full-time members or one-time collaborators. Thomas Fellman, Martin Youth Glover, Chris Thrash Weston, Jimmy Caudy, Andy Falconer, Roger Eno, Gowdy, System 7, Michael Rendall, even David Gilmour and Lee Scratch Perry did full-on collab albums with The Orb. But okay, they're coming off the heels of 2018's No Sounds Are Out of Bounds, which was a pretty great project all around. Even if it felt like it was retreading nearly every sound they'd explored in all their previous albums, it was so consistently entertaining, full of personality and energy, and lots of fun to listen to. Ended up becoming one of my favorite projects of 2018 as well. I didn't really know what to expect out of their next album, I just saw the title, Abolition of the Royal Familia, and I thought, boy, that's a much more loaded title than usual, I wonder where they're gonna take it. Spoilers, it turns out the title has almost nothing to do with anything, but whatever. Before this thing dropped, I only heard a bit of the first single, Pervitin, Empire Culling, and the Hemlock Stone Mix. Yeah, every track on this album has a ridiculous drawn-out subtitle in parentheses. It's not a remix album, I think they're just messing around. Now, I admittedly didn't feel strongly either way about the bit of the single I heard, just felt like an ambient piece that they'd done stuff like before. But I avoided any other previews that came in afterwards, hoping to just jump in without any spoilers. This project could be anything, though given it was The Orb, it was unlikely I would dislike it. They haven't really slowed down or gotten stale with age, at least in my opinion. So I just kinda jumped in, and what did we get with Abolition of the Royal Familia? Well, it's pretty dang solid. It does sound a lot like No Sounds Are Out of Bounds. Has basically all the same guests and behind-the-scenes crew as that project, as far as I can tell. And while I probably got a little more personal enjoyment out of that one, this one's more cohesive and better organized. Less feels like it's directly walking through the sounds of their past, and more exploring the ideas that set that last project apart from their other ones. Most notably the focus on, more arranged instrumentation, horns, orchestral samples. The whole thing has a brighter and more tangible quality to it that a lot of their earlier projects don't. It may not do anything you wouldn't already expect from them at this point, but it is a ton of fun to listen to from start to finish. So, individual tracks. This album starts in a pretty similar way to that of their last project, i.e. with the poppiest track in the bunch. Daze, Missing and Messed Up Mix. This track isn't as catchy as The End of the End, but it is much less trendy. It's like a spacey soul disco thing. And it is still very catchy all the same. You've been missing for days. Definitely an opener that grabs your attention. Very much reminds me of the material on The Dream, which is only a good thing in my books. It's also really short though, not even 3 minutes. But the following 3 tracks kind of keep up a similar momentum and focus on old school techno and house and disco beats. Like House of Narcotics, Opium Wars mix doesn't have as strong a hook, but its spacey, retro 90s textures going up against its soul singing create an absolutely infectious groove, and the use of these old orchestral samples in the mix makes it absolutely beautiful sounding on top of that. And its mix is even topped on the following track, Hawk King's Oseberg Buddha's Buttonhole. This one almost has like a Goa trance-influenced beat running underneath it, alongside lots of spacey ambient pads and text-to-speech voices talking about Stephen Hawking, because of course. And the orchestral strings stick around in many parts. This is a track that's just blasting the album off into the outer reaches of the galaxy in the best possible way. It is incredible. Perhaps, unfortunately, this opening trilogy of tracks is the best part of the album for me by a fairly wide margin, but they do keep delivering lots of quality material. Following track, Honeymoonies Brainwashed at Area 49 mix. Keeps up the techno and deep house grooves and spacey atmosphere established before. Isn't nearly as propulsive or energetic as the stuff that came before. It feels like it's kind of putting on the brakes a little bit. But still, getting some strong Mr. Fingers vibes off of this one that I like a lot. And that track ends the techno and house segment of the album, and we go into a stretch of ambient tracks. I did mention that I didn't feel strongly either way on following track Pervitin when I heard a bit of it prior to the album's release. But it does work really well now that I've heard it in the context of the album. The subtle strings accentuating the expansive ambient pads very much give the track a lot of space to breathe, and the maybe French-speaking placed on top feels like a throwback to in the beginning of Into the Fourth Dimension. Not one of the biggest highlights, but still definitely very cool and impressive sounding stuff. It's definitely a good sign when this is technically one of the lower points. Similar thoughts on Afros, Afghans, and Angels, Helgo Treasure Chest. Jesus Christ, these titles. While this track has that, like, stock radio tuning sound effect from GarageBand, not only have I heard that sound effect in Justice's DANCE, but I've used it in my own music before when I was, like, 15. Hearing it used here kind of cheapened the track for me, and as a result, I guess I would have to pick it as my least favorite track. But the ambient piece that follows is just as beautiful and expansive as the one that came before, if not even more so. Gives me a twinge of like M83 Digital Shades Volume 2 vibes. Still really freaking good stuff all the same. Again, if this is the worst track, that's only a good sign. I'll easily take it over, for instance, Wolfbane from their last album. Anyways, then we got Shapeshifters in 2 parts, Coffee and Ghost Train mix. Which, as you may surmise, is a very clear 2-parter, almost more like 2 separate, near-unrelated tracks strung together under the same title. The first part keeps up the spacey ambient vibes established before, lots of light electric pianos and trumpet solos going throughout, a bit of a throwback to Ununited States from their last album. But then after this, like, German opera sample halfway through, the track transforms completely into Perpetual Dawn-style dub reggae territory. I mean, it's almost entirely keyboard-driven, with lots of lean-on-me 70s electric pianos, so the fact that these 2 parts being the same track makes any lick of sense. But whatever. Still plenty of fun to be had with this track, one of the better ones here. And that second half of this track begins a whole string of dub reggae tracks in a row. Seichi's Siberian Tiger Cookie Mix is so on the nose with its dub reggae influences that I was getting, like, Thievery Corporation flashbacks. Maybe just because those horn sections here kind of sound like those on Lebanese Blonde, but still sounds great and keeps up a well-textured, thumping, and danceable groove. And the towers of dub harmonicas and weird voice samples about cheese and garlic do still remind you that no one else but the Orb could have done this. Of the dub reggae tracks on here, though, easily my favorite was Ital Orb Too Blessed to Be Stressed mix. It's the one with the most progression and evolution. Lots of sounds coming and going and making lots of use out of its 7 minutes of running time. Also that moment like 3 minutes in where the bass line deepens and there's like a key change and the whole mix just seems to double in size is freaking awesome. And after this, the album doesn't really feel like organizing itself by genre anymore. The Queen of Hearts, Princess of Clubs mix is kinda like this smooth drum and bass track combining these light and hopeful ambient washes with clinking gamelan sounds and a light but fast-paced set of drum breaks that wouldn't be completely out of place on for instance, a Goldie project. I've never heard the Orb do something like this before, and they work the drum and bass elements into their usual style really seamlessly. And we got The Weeknd, It Rained Forever, Oseberg Buddha mix, The Ravens Have Left the Tower. This is the parentheses within the parentheses that gets me there. This is a very low-key, moody ambient piece driven by rain sound effects, various disparate voice samples in the background, echoing 80s guitars, light Blade Runner synth washes, and a lonely-sounding piano performance who I'm assuming from the credits on their last album comes from Roger Eno. This track goes on quite long, 12.5 minutes, but I mean, there's nothing particularly eye-popping about that length coming from these guys. It's no Soul Planet, admittedly, not exactly a big epic centerpiece in that way, but it's still a real nice and effective emotional moment for this album. It could work really well as a closer, but it's not the closer. That honor goes to Slave Till You Die No Matter What You Buy, Lance O Meadows Mix. I think that might even be the best title here, and that's saying something. In one breath, this track is very simplistic, lots of cascading ambient washes as his instrumental, and entirely driven around like one fake government announcer sample. But, that sample, talking to Americans about how the country's now under martial law, and people need to stay in their homes, and no two people can gather in any one place without permission. Oh boy. I don't think they expected this one to hit as chillingly close to home as it ended up being. I mean, sure, there's some stuff in there about shooting civilians if they don't comply, and collecting urine samples and other stuff, probably just there to be over the top and deliver a different kind of message. But yeah, that is a thing on this album. I mean, I don't know if this would have stuck out to me as much as it did if not for this whole situation going on right now and being so unintentionally fitting. I mean, having these two long-winded ambient tracks in a row at the end did kind of make this one a tad redundant and make me less look forward to this one. If not for how perfectly timed that sample was, this probably would be my least favorite. But yeah, this was definitely an impactful ending nonetheless. So that's Abolition of the Royal Familia. At the end of the day, it's an Orb album. In one breath, I didn't really get that much out of this project that I haven't already gotten out of their previous ones. It's not the most creative or out-of-the-box project they've ever done, and this also applied to No Sounds Are Out of Bounds, but I think that project had better standouts and was just an overall more fun and memorable listening experience. But still, that doesn't take away from this project's successes either, or make it any less fun to listen to in its own right. I think my thoughts on this project are more or less the same as my thoughts on that last Plaid album, Polymer. That project also didn't do anything I wouldn't have otherwise expected out of those guys, and was the follow-up to a project from a few years ago that I thought was executed in a generally more memorable and impactful way. But Polymer still ended up as an honorable mention in my year-end list for 2019 because it still did everything I would want out of a Plaid album and did it well. And same deal goes for this album, and I almost certainly enjoyed this more than Polymer, being a longtime Orb fan. Sure, it could be a tad disappointing given how I also tend to expect Orb albums to all bring something different to the table. This one technically does, but it skates pretty close to a lot of previous work. But I can't say this feels like anything more than a nitpick on an album I otherwise had a lot of fun with and does everything I would personally want out of an Orb project. If this had come out before No Sounds Are Out of Bounds, I absolutely would have been more hyped on this than that one. And for what it's worth, it's not like it's just a blatant self-rip-off either. For instance, I do think its structure and the way most of it is like organized by genre is a cool idea, and it does flow way better than their last album as well. And those first 3 tracks, god damn do they hit hard. The production is just great across the board, even on the least interesting moments here. I don't know. I guess at the end of the day, while it's not the absolute pinnacle of what they have to offer, it's still pretty great across the board. If you're as big a fan of the Orb as I am, you have no reason not to check it out, and even if you're not, it can't hurt to give it a shot anyway. Only time will tell how it stacks up against other 2020 albums, but I was quite happy with what I got here all the same, and I think I am overall feeling a solid 8 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.